Well, hello and welcome to the KAVOD Family Podcast. My name is Casey Wilson, and we have Justin Bonner and Cliff Graham with us today. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey.
How are you?
Hey.
Yeah.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
We have, this is going to be a pretty awesome take. We're going to talk about Cliff's brand new book. It's called The Boundary of Blood, and it's really a historical fiction on the life of Shamgar. It's your take on what possibly was going on right behind the scenes that drew out these two verses that we find in the book of Judges. There's just two verses. That's it. Chapter 3, chapter 5. That's all we know for sure about the life of Shamgar. But what we do understand is the heartbeat of men and what men go through and the themes of manhood and brokenness, life, struggle, hardship, oppression, everything that takes place in the book of Judges. And so your take on this draws out a lot of those themes. And I would love if we were able in this podcast first, let's talk about this title, because this phrase, the boundary of blood, that line is not necessarily in Judges. It's not in the Bible. It's a place, right? It's a location. And so when you get time, Cliff, maybe you can draw that out. But just jumping into this, I noticed we didn't even introduce you, man. So if people are tuning into this podcast for the first time, they may not know who Cliff Graham is. They may not know who you are. Welcome to the show.
Man, I appreciate it. Yep. A man who sinned, saved by grace, walking with the Lord, and proud husband of a marvelous wife, proud father of 4 kiddos. And I have been for about the last probably almost 18, 19 years now, I have been writing or working on biblical fiction. I don't like that phrase because it implies the Bible is fiction, but I write novels and stories based upon activity in the Bible where there's a lot of silence, where the Lord does not say in his word, this is exactly how something happened. You just kind of get like a post-game review of something.
Yeah.
I like to try to go in there and create parables out of it, the way that Jesus taught. Say, okay, imagine a guy doing this one thing. So if something happens in my books that is in the Bible, I really try hard to faithfully replicate it exactly as the Bible puts it. But it's fiction. It is, I've made up scenarios. There's a lot of that stuff. And all it's serving to do is to help men in particular. It's for everybody, but my bullseye is always the heart of men, because I know what I need in my heart is to be told about the greatness of God through the lives of heroic warriors, especially in the Old Testament. So that's my calling. I wrote a series based on King David that we're now finishing with KAVOD Family Ministries after a long, hairy journey. But KAVOD is now my publisher. So for readers of mine that are listening to this, or for folks that are new, this is the place to find my writing. Will be to support KAVOD Family Ministries, and we're just excited for the days ahead. So this is the first project, in addition to the War Prayers book, that we are putting out as author-publisher relationship. So.
Very cool. So if you were to go on our website, you'll see KAVODfamily.org. You'll also see a drop down a tab where you can go and see Cliff Graham or Graham Projects, I think is what we've titled it. And the hope is that this is the home for many future projects. Yeah. Books, maybe
Movies,
even
TV
some
shows.
film. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Some fun stuff, right?
Right. Yep.
And so we're trusting God with all of that. So let's jump into this, the boundary of blood. Justin, you're part of this podcast. You have kind of been, I don't know what I want to call you, an editor or somebody who's read through and gone through it and tried to pull out a lot of themes. Yeah, but God has given you an eye so that way you can help many other men as we talk about this book, as we talk about the themes of life. You're able to kind of harvest from this book and from the Bible and make some connections, and that's why we drug you in here. And you and Cliff are developing a fun relationship with, writing and all that fun stuff. And so let's jump into this. Cliff, the boundary of blood, what is it? Where does it come from? For those that have no idea what that phrase is, why did you not title this book Shamgar? Why did we call it the boundary of blood?
Yeah, so the origin of the origin of the book is that I was in a phase of my life where I had just made a hot mess of everything. I had failed in business. I had just screwed everything up, hurt a lot of people, and it was like I had been really desirous of pleasing God with my calling, but I had made every single wrong decision under the sun, which I think can resonate with a lot of people. But for me, this was sort of my therapy session that I developed this story starting about 5 years ago or so, and I'd had the outline. We'd made a proof of concept short film called Hold the Pass that something about this character of Shamgar was prodding at me in my soul, because I was haunted by what it says in Judges 5, which is where in the days of Shamgar, the villagers of Israel had lost their heart to fight. They couldn't travel highways. They were under the thumb of a Philistine oppressor. The Philistines were a great empire on the plains that frequently oppressed Israel prior to David. David vanquishes them from history, but prior to that, they really oppressed them. And so I thought, what is it about this that I think in our culture, in my own life, in my own mistakes, my own journey, that just is resonating with me right now? And I came up with a scenario where, because we don't know much about Shamgar at all, other than what it says, describing the times of Shamgar, where the people have lost heart. They're in rebellion against God. This is a time where the Bible is very clear. Every man is doing what is right in his own eyes. So God owes these people nothing in the way of salvation and help. I mean, they're rejecting him and rebelling against them. But in his grace, he keeps sending champions to save them one after another. And this guy, Shamgar, he's just really only described in one verse. And it says that he was the son of Anath, which is a Canaanite name, which is also really interesting. He's not a Hebrew that we know of. And that he kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad and saves Israel. And I thought that was completely fascinating, to where, again, at that time, the Hebrews were not allowed to own weapons. They didn't know how to forge iron. There's all this stuff going on. So God says, I'm going to pick a guy randomly with a farming tool, and he's going to kill 600 Philistines and begin the rescue of Israel, begin the rescue of my people. So I just, as I thought about that and formulated it over the years, and then realized that there needed to be a first book to begin the KAVOD family relationship with, I thought this is the one that's been sitting in the hopper a long time. I'm going to go ahead and push through and finish it. And it'll be kind of partial therapy session for myself and a ministry effort for honestly to let the average guy out there know that there is hope for you. I mean, that if you are alive and kicking and you are trying to follow God, he does have a path for you. Your obedience, your willingness to make the hard stands when he asks you to make them. So all that to say, that's where the book itself came from. It's the most probably allegorical thing I've written, where it's with the David books, it's a long narrative with a lot of characters and a lot of world building. This is just a pretty straightforward, almost a fable of Shamgar taking a stand against these Philistines. So the title, The Boundary of Blood, refers to an actual place. And for those looking at the screen, you'll see things labeled all around this spot. This is in Israel. This is modern Israel. And that is the Elah Valley right there. You can see the farmland on it. And that is where David fought Goliath. It's where a lot of things happen in the Old Testament when it comes to war and battle. A lot of these wars were fought in this area because it was a very strategic location. In the back of the screen, you can see Judean hills. Up there in that region is Jerusalem. And then kind of to the bottom left of the camera, off camera, is the plains where the Philistines were. So anytime the Philistines wanted to come and pick a fight with the Israelites, they would invade up this valley, a few others, but mainly this one. And there is a point in that valley where the Israelites always had to gather, because that was their version of Thermopylae in the Spartans. Like if the Philistines got any farther than this point, the whole Israelite kingdom would be overrun. So they called that place the Ephas Damim. Sometimes you hear it called Pas Damim, and that's translated to the boundary of blood.
Okay.
So if the king summons the armies and conscripts the farmers and everything, and they tell you have to meet at the boundary of blood, that's when all these wives know they're about to become a widow. They're about to lose their sons. This is a desperate, horrible. It's really bad if we're fighting here. Does that make sense? So the robber has come across the threshold of your door, and you're fighting him in your hallway. He's not out on your yard anymore. So that's what the boundary of blood was for these people. And so I thought, man, this is because that place shows up so frequently. We can really build on that. It shows up in the Lion of War series again. I mean, David fights there all the way up into modern Israel. There's tank battles that occur near there. It is a very strategic place. So I thought, what a perfect title that describes an actual place, but also a metaphorical place for every man to realize at some point, I have to stop being a coward. I have to stop running. I have to stop beating myself up, and I have to just make my stand right here. And my blood will spill before the enemy gets past me.
So if you're looking at the map, you're saying that the Philistines would come from the west and they'd come up, kind of come through BiblePlaces.com. Right through that spot, right?
Yeah.
And then come towards, and you said there's now a gas station right there at Ephos Daman.
Yeah,
right?
so on the bottom left of the screen, that's really the pure west. They'd be coming up there, but there's a pass that sneaks around where you see that highway where it goes through BiblePlaces.com. The audio listeners are like, what are these guys talking about? That highway right there. There was another kind of footpath that would have been through the hills for the locals to use.
And if they break that line and go through, they've basically taken the
so
land.
today there's a gas station there. You know, I once got an energy drink after a long day out of the gas station, but it was my time spent there. I spent 4 years as a tour leader in the land. The books that I write come from years of research on the ground in the libraries, talking to the experts, trying to really paint the most plausible picture I can while making sure it's a story, right? It's fiction. And so that spot where the gas station is at, in our story, is the little mountain pass that Shamgar has to defend. And it's, like I said, if you know of 300 and the Spartans and all that, it's the same type of story. It's a ticking clock. It unfolds almost in real time. It's a very fast-paced thing where he's warned that they're coming, and what's he going to do about it? He has to make the choice.
So you also pointed out that there's this analogy to a blood rock, right? Mm-hmm. Like the boundary of blood, it was a place where warriors would have to say, look, this is the point. Mm-hmm. If I have to retreat, this is where I stop and I fight. And if I die, this is where I die. Right? It's that moment where my conviction stops here. Right. I'll tolerate for a moment, but at this point, I will no longer tolerate what's taking place.
Yeah, like there's a point physically and strategically on a battlefield where if you're fighting the enemy, you're pushed back or you're pushing him back. At some point there's a actual metric place where you retreat or you're going to win the day in advance. Like there is a spot somewhere there. And so if you're told, hold at all costs, if that comes over the radio, then okay, well, that means that we're either winning or we're dying. There's not going to be a shoot at each other for a bit and then just who's going to hold the day for tomorrow. It's we win or we die in this exact spot right here, whether it's a bunker or, whatever. In this story, the idea is that in the boundary of blood, even inside of a last stand kind of area, there is, for the individual man, there's a rock that he has to pick and say, this is my blood rock. And this is the rock that my blood will cover. Either I kill the enemy and cover the rock with his blood, or he kills me and it's my blood on the rock. But this is the blood rock that I'm choosing right here. So I will advance and fight in it, but I'm not going past this point because behind me, behind this blood rock is my wife, my children, my community, everything I love in this life. I will actually die to defend that right here.
That's pretty good. So there's a ton of ways or places that I'd love to go with this conversation. But real quick, as we go into this, I want to draw out this idea of a blood rock. To me, it strikes a chord with convictions. It strikes a chord with, obviously, a blood rock, the blood. It talks to me about Christ, his blood poured out to us. All those analogies kind of come together. Mm-hmm. As a man, there becomes a point in our life to where we have to figure out what our convictions are in life. If not, we're just going to drift. We're going to wander to and fro, right? Like our mind, our hearts, everything in us is going to wander. The blood rock, the boundary of blood for us, may not be a place in our life physically where we have to take a fight, where we have to fight for something. But it might be something inwardly. It might be something spiritually where we have to begin to fight, whether it be, the themes of this book, Justin, you went through chapter by chapter and pulled them out. Almost, there's everything's in here. Greed, lust, envy, desire, fear, anger, right? Like all of those emotions are so raw in this book. And you can see Shamgar, especially in the beginning, just kind of floundering. Mm-hmm. How am I going to save my family? How am I going to save what am I going to do? Are we just going to retreat until he finds the voice of Yahweh, his conviction, and at that point he turns and he fights, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's such a parallel to life on what are the convictions that God has placed in our life, that we recognize, okay, this is what God says, this is the line. I cannot go beyond this. Yeah. I can endure. I can embrace culture. I can walk through life. I can manage a lot of things, but at this point, I have to draw the line and say no more. right? And that might be in your family, your home, over yourself, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just the idea that there's oppression over your life, and eventually you have to turn and fight.
Yeah, I think there's a level where the book paints a good picture of the fact that God will often use an external threat to change an internal problem in you, right? Like he brings this threat is happening around you. The walls are kind of closing in, but that's in an effort to reveal Shamgar's shortcomings, his failings, right? That he's living in a place that's in a bad situation, and he, by his folly, has made his own bad situation worse.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's poorly stewarded a poor situation, and he's really gotten himself into a bad spot. And that's how it is for a lot of us, for many of us, especially as men, is we've maybe not had the best situation. Maybe there's bad things going on. Maybe we had a bad upbringing. Maybe the country is in shambles, but then we don't help ourselves out. We don't do ourselves any favors, and we exacerbate the problem, and we make it worse by our own foolishness, our own sin. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think it's a cool picture with the boundary of blood and everything. One of the beautiful ways we can use fiction is, and even history, is by looking at warfare. Like warfare has been something that has been with man forever. Since the fall, warfare has marked the human race. And there's a level, I think it was Chesterton who said the soldier doesn't fight because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. And I think that's the level where we see Shamgar is, obviously he develops a distaste for the Philistines because of their cruelty and their savagery, but ultimately he finds his fighting is for God, and it's also for his family who's behind him. It's not because, it's not exclusively because of the Philistines, it's because of God and his family. And I think that the same thing for us as men is, so often it's so easy to maybe identify with a certain cause or a certain party or a certain group, whether that's political, social, whatever it is, and you end up fighting for the sake of differences of opinion between you and the person you're against, not for the sake of, the people behind you. Like we might get caricatured or painted a certain way here, even at KAVOD and at KAVOD Family, that we're fighting because we hate some people who have a different view of us. But that's not the case. We're fighting and we're speaking the truth of God into the public square because we love our family. And I love my children, my great-grandchildren that are yet to be born. and I love them enough to stand in the gap and be hated and maybe even give my life, my reputation for their sake. And I think that's brought out in the story of Shamgar. And like you said, there's so many emotive themes throughout the whole book, like you said, with even lust. And I think a real red thread through the whole thing for Shamgar is pride, that he's a very proud man, and he's not wanting to feel the pain of admitting that he is responsible for his family's dire situation. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of men that keeps them from crossing the threshold from failure and sin cycles to victory and walking in a true life of power with God. Is that they're too proud. It's like I heard somebody say that, Christ sets the bar so low in the Beatitudes that if you have any pride, you can't get under it. Like, blessed are the poor in spirit. Like, blessed are the homeless beggars, spiritually speaking. That's where
desperate for God.
The Greek in that is like, you don't even have the strength to lift up your arm to hold a cup to ask for change. Mm-hmm. Like, you're literally laying there paralyzed, like the guy in One by Metallica. Like, has no arms or legs or eyes or mouth or hair. He just can't move. He's just laying there stuck. Yeah. Like, that's who Christ calls us to recognize ourselves as. And I think it's beautiful to see the way that it's drawn out of Shamgar, that is where he needs to be. Like, he needs to recognize himself there, and it takes this journey. But I think for men, it's so helpful to see God will get you there. Like God will get you to the point of
Yeah.
recognizing your weakness. And what are you going to do? Are you just going to implode, or are you going to say, okay, what will you have me do?
And that's how we start them. We start them with a real a brokenness. So the dedication of this book, usually I have it dedicated to kids or wife or something like that. But this one, I just wanted to put in there for every man that has ever been broken.
Yep.
It's just simply, this is my love letter to my fellow broken men out there, because you're one of the most effective enemy strategies. I believe this with my convictionally. I believe this is the enemy throwing your past at you and saying, well, you are the guy that did that. So just keep that in mind, and I have a vision from the Lord. Yeah, but you're the guy that did that. I mean, it's that kind of crippling past. So what I put on him in the book is, I thought debt was a good one, because not only is that relevant to a lot of us in the modern world and just how things are, but there's nothing that can cripple you like a debt can, because if you cheat on your wife and you commit sin personally, that's horrible, awful stuff. But it kind of is contained to your immediate circle, right? But if you're just in the hole to a lot of people or to something big, they can do things to you and damage you and own you the rest of your life. And so I thought this is a good symbol of when a man feels like the crippling of his past on him, and he's trying to do the right thing, but it's just not working out. And I think the mistake of, when I write books about the mighty men, and I love these characters, but the last thing I would want to do is make them look like they have no warts on them. I'm far more interested in David and his mighty men, and Shamgar and Caleb and Joshua and all of them with, here's how great God is, that in spite of this guy's flaws, these guys are great because they were obedient to their great God. Like, their finest moment was when they finally stopped resisting God and yielded to him. And so Shamgar kind of being our avatar for that. He's saying he's crippled. Like you said, Casey, where this book starts out at, he is in a hot mess of a situation internally, externally and internally. He's gotten, this is a different time, a different era. You don't have the same type of marriage. In 21st century America is a lot more intimate of a marriage than what you would have seen 3,000 years ago in ancient Israel. However, this is still the wife of your youth. This is still a companion, and his feeling of being an incompetent idiot in front of his wife plays into it. This is feeling, so we're meeting him at a very broken place. And then even when God shows up to tell him this is what's coming, he kind of half believes it, mostly doubts it. And all the way through the story, the idea is that this character replicates our journey of saying, I think I heard from God, but I'm not sure. And well, now I'm distracted by this for a while. And oh, wait, no, there's another warning, but yeah, that sounds scary, but now I'm distracted again. So I think most of that book, there's action scenes, there's fighting scenes in it, but I was far more interested in the internal war Shamgar was going through to get to the actual battlefield, because that's where his faith, God's almost like, I'm not going to give you the battle until you trust me to show up there in that place, right?
Yeah, I don't want to leave that note for a second, because I think it's good to identify that it's not hagiography. Hagiography is the idea of like writing or speaking on someone and only of their good parts, lauding, praising them, and you've all read the biographies where you're like, man, I guess that guy was perfect, right? And it's like, oh no, turns out he hated this people group or did this, like we talked about before this, George Whitefield or the Wesleys, like all the good that they did, but their marriages were in shambles because they were out traveling and preaching and doing all this. And I think it's important to note, to hit that, because number one, the Bible does not present us with hagiography. The Bible does not give us the perfect. I think that's a testament to the truthfulness of the Bible. If you look at the Egyptian culture, you will not find in any Egyptian record books the Exodus. Why would they write down the time when Yahweh smote each one of their gods systematically, right? And the Bible presents us with the realities, the full color pictures of its mightiest people, of David, of Samson, of Gideon, of Paul, of Peter, right? They could have just picked up with Paul at the moment he became a good guy, right? They could have left off Peter denying, relationship with the Gentiles for the sake of fear of the Jews. Like, we could have gone through all that, but the Bible is real, and I think it's an important thing to note, because oftentimes we will present ourselves to God in a way where we think we can only present to him the good, and the right and the virtuous and the unblemished parts of our lives, when in reality God wants us to recognize our sin and our failure and come to him with that, right? To be real with him in prayer, to be real with him in communion, when we're reading the word, when we're fellowshipping, when we're loving our family, that we're honest with God and we don't try to give God a version of ourself that's only the good parts, but that we come to him honestly in confession and in repentance and say, God, I blew it again, or I'm struggling with this, or all of that. I think that's a good picture from this book, that it's not just, you don't pick up at him killing 600 Philistines, right? That we can kind of fictionally imagine this story of a man who was in all ways a failure. Yeah. Like he like you said, he failed in every way until God broke him. And then by God's power, he was victorious, right? Yeah. It was by God's power. With Samson, we were talking about, Samson didn't walk around like hulked up, killing people left and right. It was like when God's power came upon him, he did mighty things, right? And there's this level of God has to get you to that point, but we can't consider ourselves in God's eyes only by our best, but it's a mixture. It's who we are. It's our best and our worst is how we come to him. I think that's so important for guys. Yeah. You know,
the journey, Casey, just on the idea of having, he shows up, and a lot of some of the things in Christian media that I will look at and say, okay, I know everyone's trying hard here, but that's a little bit too clean of a conversion story, right? This guy finally encounters Jesus, and suddenly the victories just start piling up. But in this story, he does submit himself to God. Well, let's say he gets there. It's still hard. I mean, there's still a lot of suffering yet to go. Yeah. So maybe talk about just that sanctification as you see it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of you've rightly aligned yourself with God, right? And he's going to give you that initial kind of kick, but then the sanctification journey begins, right? And you're going to get punched in the teeth a whole lot more.
Well, I mean, yeah, here I am. So I came to know the Lord when I was 18, and I'm 40 years old. So 20 years into this walk with the Lord, right? And this is the first time I've realized the book was dedicated to me, right? And you look at it and you go, okay, yeah, broken man, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I think there's a point in your life as a Christian early on, you're attracted to stories. You're attracted to David and Goliath. You're attracted to the things that Jesus does. You're attracted to the miracles and the work of the apostles and all the work that gets done. You really are. And as you age and as you walk through and get a few of your own scars, you start to see Abraham in a different light, right? And then you start going back through and you kind of get comforted in a different way by the sufferings of those men. You really do. I mean, we were just talking about Abraham, right? The fact that here's a man that not only out of fear gives his wife away twice, but out of confusion, he doesn't know what to do. He ends up entering into a sexual relationship with a slave woman, having a child, and yet all of that God uses for his great grand purpose, right? He doesn't get to a point with Abraham where he just says, dude, you blew it. I got to go get a different Abram. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the man we call the father of our faith. You get what I'm saying? He's the father of our faith, and look at the failures of his life. And so I know the men I talk to that come to me with questions, especially as they're entering into marriage and especially as they're entering into fatherhood. My wife and I, we struggled with not being able to have children for 12, 13 years. I have peers and friends and others that I know that have gone through that struggle of fertility and wondering, God, is this a result of my own sin? Is this a result of this or that or this or that? And when you sit down and you read through the Bible and you look at it and you go, wait a minute, most of the patriarchs, most of our forefathers of the faith struggled with this. And yet God used it and leveraged it for his good. And so when you see that degree of brokenness in the lives of the scriptures, in the lives of the men, Psalm 51, when David cries out, restore to me the joy of your salvation. And then post Psalm 51, he continues to write. And you probably don't realize how many Psalms you've read, and you're reading from a man that was a murderer, adulterer, and yet you're reading the lines and what God did in his life post that experience. Right. And so, there's a thread throughout this whole book. You kind of highlight every now and then you talk about the brokenness of people, like the weakness of men, There's no men in the land, right? And then there's this line at the end, which is awesome, that you write in. Yeah, here it is. And it says, in quotes, you say, "When this day is written, tell them a farmer stood alone in the boundary. He gestures at his wife, and tell them that a woman had more courage than every man in this city." And you go, okay, that's after Shamgar was a failure, right? That's after he screwed up.
Yeah.
I mean, I praise God for the stories of Noah, and not just the pre-ark stories of Noah. We can look at Noah and we can make him this righteous figure that was spotless and had no failure. And then you look at him post the flood and you go, okay, he had a few blemishes.
Yeah.
And it's not that I want to make myself in the company of sinners. It's not. It's that you find that sinners are in the company of an awesome God who is able to restore, fight, walk, befriend, love, and walk you through these things.
Yeah, and God will say, "I will share my glory with no one." He says that in Scripture.
My goodness.
I will share my glory with no one. So whatever he has to do in your life and in my life, our lives, to exert the maximum squeeze of his glory, he's going to do that. And that is a deeply painful process if you don't have the right perspective on it, because you're realizing, hey, actually, this is not about me. This is really about, I, when left to myself, will do nothing but screw it up.
Yeah.
That's simply going to be what happens. I'm going to screw it up. But how great is God that he not only saves me from screw ups, yes, but he's telling me, get back in the fight. Your past is past. Doesn't mean that you don't have consequences to live with forever, but
right.
But you're not supposed to sit there and just feel bad for yourself and feel like, well, my time is over. I mean, your equipping and your calling didn't end just because of sin per se. Certain roles and positions, maybe I think like a pastor that falls, that kind of thing. But who you are and what you're gifted in, when the Lord decides to break you and be like, hey, you got too far from me, I'm going to snap this leg, I'm going to pull you back in, then you should feel so much more empowered on the other side of that, to think, I no longer have to operate like I brought anything to the table. I heard a good thing the other day about, we're so glad that we're saved by faith, by the grace of God only and not our works, because I don't want to spend time in heaven with guys sitting around saying what they did to get saved. Like no one's going to show up around that campfire with these were my deeds in the battle, right? I mean, it's just I cannot believe he let me in here. I mean, that's what we should be like. I can't believe he let me in here. And again, this book is a love letter to all of the men. And I would say, lost guys, yeah, but I think for Christian men, if you hit the burnout point of your life, or you're in that pit of despair and confusion, and not everything is always your fault. Sometimes you've just been led into a bad situation and you don't know God anymore in your head. Like, I don't feel like I know him. I feel like he led me into a trap and abandoned me. Yeah. Like, this is also for that guy, right? And that's another journey of the Christian.
Yeah, I think part of that sanctification piece of the whole thing is that, like, this picture that before you become a Christian, Satan can't like preempt the conversion of Christians. He's not like going around going, God in a couple years is going to get a hold of that guy, so let's get on him right now.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the way that it works. He's not omnipotent. He's not omnipresent. He's not God. But there's a level of the moment when you become activated. If you're a Christian and you've been lulled to sleep and you haven't been doing anything and God gets a hold of you, or when you come to Christ, there's a honeymoon phase of where God, I believe, pours out more grace upon you to protect you, to shield you, like a child. Like, you're a baby and you're held, and then you're a toddler and they hold your hand so you learn how to walk, and then they let go and you're going to fall and you're going to have to keep your finger out of the light socket, all of that. And there's a level where at that moment the devil you come onto his radar, right? The demonic forces, the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places, you come onto their radar, right? And there's a level where when you conscript into God's army, right, the opposing army knows that you just joined up. And there's a level where now the pressure is going to be mounting and it's going to become more intense, because now you're actually a threat. Now you're actually in the battle. But the flip side of that is that you're on the side of victory, right? Like you're on the side of the one true and living God. As everyone's fond of saying, you're on the right side of history, right? Like you're on the winning team. You're with the God who created all things. You're with the God who has the power to save and to deliver and to heal. And like Abraham, I'm going to stab my son because I'm pretty sure you can raise him from the dead, or else you wouldn't have given him to me and told me to do this, right? You're on that side. And so that walk of sanctification is often the fact that we miss that nobody cares. The enemy doesn't care about a soldier who's in the offices, right, filing paperwork or sleeping. They care about the soldier who's out fighting and winning the war and pushing back the enemy forces. And so when you become that, like we're calling you to be, when you become that, when Shamgar becomes that, the first thing you're going to do is probably get smacked in the head with a rock. Like you will not feel more arrows in your back, in your front from the enemy, and from your back from people who are not pursuing godliness, who you thought were your friends. You'll not be feeling that until you actually enter the fight. But rest assured that we have the armor of God and that we will prevail, whether in life or in death. Victory is ours now. And take courage in that sanctification is a journey, right? Eugene Peterson, it's a sustained obedience in one direction. And you're going to trip and fall. Line. You're going to fail. But ultimately, it is God who is keeping you. It's his righteousness that's getting you there. Like you said, right? It's not going to be a who's who in heaven. It's going to be a who's that. Like, why did he let us in? You know what I mean? Like, how did we get in here? Exactly like you said, and it's all by God's grace.
So one last note on the line of sanctification, and I think this might help for some of us. We're living right now in a I don't want to call it a dark hour. It's a moment of pain. I'll call it that. We've had a pastor that many of us have been influenced by or loved at different points, who's fallen in his own into sexual immorality, and that blight is on the church right now, right? It made major news headlines, and it's being talked about in papers and all over. And you might look at that and you go, wow, what a great failure. But in light of Shamgar, in light of sanctification, in light of understanding that God is actually the one in charge, he's the captain of the ship, I look at that situation and I go, depending on how this walks itself out, you're about to see a restoration of a marriage that was hurting for probably 3, 4, 5, 6 years, right?
Sure.
This story could finish in a way to where the bride, not the church, but his bride, is closer and more in love with her husband and more appreciative for who he is than at any point in her marriage. You have no idea what could come forth from this, right? And so when we look at the story of God, it's never just what's on the surface. It's never. This is not just about the debt that Shamgar owed in this book. It's also about the pain and the separation between him and his wife, and the way that his wife looked at him because of the past failures in his life. You have to restore that wound also, right? And so that's the beauty of what God does, is that God heals in such a way to where we can trust again because our hope is in him. We can walk again. Why? Because he's the one that strengthens us. It's ultimately because he's the one that's causing us to fall on him and trust in him. And I think this book puts that on display. You don't get like a Shamgar part 2, like how does marriage actually work out? We don't get that part. But what you do see restored is the glory of a marriage. You see the point to where a wife looks differently again at a husband. Where a husband believes that he is the man of the house again. And it's almost like there's a clean slate, right? Like a cleansing to where he can try again. And we all need that.
I was interested to that point, not to give the plot and the story away to the reader, but that moment of realizing that there's the future is optimistic, but it's going to be hard, right? To not have the end with the flourishing music and then it's over. It's like even the way this story ends, Because, I mean, again, it's not giving it away. Say, Shamgar kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad. That's already in the Bible.
That's got to make it into the book. Like, that's all we got.
Yeah.
You know?
But I was far more interested in the moments before that as a teaching thing, because it's like that's the victory. That's awesome. Yep. Let's lop off some Philistine heads. These are terrible child sacrificing death cult, Baal worshiping. These are horrible people that deserve to get ox goaded, right? They do. But prior to that point, again, if the battle is internal, if ultimately God will bring the victory in his own means and ways, that's what we're not supposed to stress about. How is God actually going to defeat the Philistines for me? Yeah, you don't have to worry about that part of it. What you have to worry about is, are you right before him enough to where he says, yep, now I will call you up off the bench. You know, like right in your heart posture, I should say. Like, he's going to pick you out of nowhere. He picks Gideon out of nowhere. He's like, greetings, O valiant warrior, he says to Gideon. And Gideon's like, wait, who? What? I mean, so he doesn't, it's not that God shows up.
The smallest man in the smallest tribe.
Yeah. It's like God doesn't always call the sanctified guy. He just says, I will call the guy and then sanctify him. I will progressively improve him, right? For those who don't know what sanctify means, God is sharpening, honing, and building a servant out of you. That's what sanctifying looks like. And He's going to take that journey and that process and in 10 million ways that you can't ever comprehend in the lives of others, that sanctification is going to be effective as well. Because it's not just about Casey, Justin, Cliff, whoever. It is entirely about what God is doing in your life that can tangentially relate to me for a short season, which then talks to you. It's him being his own hero. And him being jealous about that. How cool is that, right? I mean, God is jealous about being the star of his own show. It's like, I will not share any of this glory with you people, because I just won't. And that should just encourage us like
And
crazy.
if we can grasp that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about the other day just the value of reading Elizabeth Elliot.
Yeah.
And you need women like that see beyond the pain of a moment, right? Her marriage to her husband, he's murdered. And if you get stuck in that, to where now I'm a widow and I'm going to live as a widow the rest of my life, oppressed, afraid, hurt, abused, I have nothing, right? But if you can get a hold of God and if you can see that he's actually writing a story much bigger than this, you can begin to trust again. Yep. You can get up. You can begin to believe and walk and live. And she writes in such a way that causes you to see the light in the darkness. She just does.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that there's a level where I don't want you to hear us saying that God wants you to be this like
failure,
broken, battered, loser who just has a lot of faith, right? God is creating you into a valiant man of God. Like, you think about these bad circumstances, and yes, at the end of your life, you die and your body's covered with scars. Your heart's covered with the scars of your own mistakes. Right, other people have felt that, but yet God's goal is to get you to be a worthy man. His goal, like you think about these men in history, like Alfred the Great, like who fought back against the Danes and became this mightiest king, the only king in British history called the Great, right? And he was like the seventh son. You know what? He was like the seventh or eighth son. And he somehow becomes king. Like, they all die, and he somehow becomes king, and he likes to do poetry and not really huge into like warfare. He was like more of an artsy guy, and then he becomes this great and mighty king in the history, the White Horse King in the history of England. And you look back on this and you go, okay, so God doesn't want to keep us as that broken man, but he will allow us to have that so that he can make us into something mighty. Like, I think the absolute best story of that in the Bible is Jacob. He is the best example of this. He is an utter screw up. He's a D-bag from the womb. Like, from the womb, he's like, no, I'm going to trick you. Like, from the womb, he's trying to trip up his brother. And you see him just demolish his life to the point where he's sitting on a riverbank and he's got his Laban coming this way because he stole all of his sheep by painting them, right? And then he's got his brother Esau coming from this way, and the last thing Esau said to him was, if I ever see you again, if I catch you on the streets again, I'm going to kill you. And they're coming, and he falls asleep. He's like, I can't do it. He sits down. He's at the end of his rope. He's been broken completely, and it's fully self-inflicted. 100% self-inflicted. And he has this dream where he wrestles with the angel of God, right? And then there's the moment where he touches his hip socket and puts his hip out of alignment. Yeah. And the rest of his life now, he's walking with that limp. He feels that pain every day. This is before modern medicine. Like, he didn't get a hip replacement. His hip just hurt to walk forever. Yeah. But it even says, no, on that side, there's a whole series you could do on of walking with a limp. We put out a video on it that I taught on that a little bit, where he walked to remember the fact that it is God who delivers, just like you said. But there's the other side of, like, going to what you were talking about with people that fall and who can be restored and who can repent and still be used by God. But there's this verse in Proverbs 22:28, do not move the ancient landmark that your fathers have set. And after Jacob's hip is touched, it says this little line, and the Jews to this day don't eat the sinew, the meat of the hip socket. Like, that thing happened, and the fact that Jacob was crippled because of his sin, but yet God used him, was memorialized and remembered.
Absolutely.
And for us, we need to take these stories of men like Shamgar, this farmer who God raised up to deliver the people of Israel, and David and his folly, Solomon being the wisest man who ever lived, and his failure. All of these people, Peter even, who walked with Christ and yet denied him, just like Judas. We need to remember those things and say, God, you can use them, you can use me in spite of my failures, and don't forget that heritage that God has given us of his faithfulness despite failure.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the point that I'm trying to make with the whole Lawson situation, is that one of the last lessons of his life could be the greatest lesson he ever teaches. Do not forsake. Right. Do not forsake not only your love for God, but your bride, right? And so if his life ends with the correction to how many thousands of men that were on that edge, right? And they stop and they turn and they go back to their wives and their love, and they rewrite the course of their church, their life, their ministry, their purpose, where they spend their time, how they spend their hours. They rewrite that. I'm going, you're telling me God's not using failure for his good? That's what he does. This is the God that we serve.
And when he gets to glory, he's going to tell God, thank you.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
He's going to, because it's like Samson.
Yes.
Think about this. Samson, he killed more in his death than he did in his entire life. And how many people now, like you said, for every one person who reads this story and goes, what a loser. Yeah. There's going to be another man that says, I'm right there. My foot had almost slipped, like Asaph says in Psalm 73. My foot had almost slipped. But because of God's grace, and I guarantee you that on Steve Lawson's deathbed, he's going to say, the Lord is good. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
It's not to make light. God will just like there's that portion in Scripture about David and his life where he begins to talk about his, now being a son, and he says, I will discipline you with the rods of men, but I will not forsake you. My loving kindness will not depart from you, right? And there will be correction for this, and we trust that justice and all that will get played out for him, his family, his wife, and care will be done. All that takes place. We're just saying that in the Christian narrative and God's epic and his great grand story, that he has a way of weaving and using the broken to bring about light. And that's what he does.
The mindset, just to land that plane, I think it's to say the premise of the story is not stay broken and weepy all the time. I think more it's about men have a hard time recognizing that they are broken. They have a hard time recognizing it. And so this is that little bit of a cattle prod to say, hey, you are, and if you don't think you are, just wait. It'll get revealed to you in some way. And then once you're grabbed by God in that way, like he says, okay, I'm going to empower you with my spirit. Then the victorious life that follows is you get the Hebrews 11 effect of like, hey, they don't talk about all those characters' faults in Hebrews 11. You think even Samson makes it, and that guy just, by what we read, he looks like a knucklehead the whole way through.
Right.
And it's like in spite of himself. But then there he is listed in Hebrews 11 centuries later. Like, he was a man of great faith and followed God. So we don't get to see the daily faith. No. That we see their faults. And so I just, to every man listening out there, that if you encounter this book, if you more importantly, read the Word and see yourself in some of these characters and realize that, yes, you have made a mess of things. You have. But your best days really may yet be ahead of you. And you get to be the righteous old man if you start now. And you say, you do. You get to be the righteous old man if you start now. And even if you're an old man right now, you get to be a righteous older man, you know, if you really figure that part of this out. So
that is good.
I think this is a good passage to close reading at the end of 1 Corinthians 1. Paul says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even the things that are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord."
Yeah, that's good. Amen. Well, thank you for listening to the KAVOD Family Podcast. You can find more of Cliff's stuff at KAVODfamily.org, Cliff Graham Projects. We'll be releasing quite a bit on there about what's coming, what's already available, just some exciting stuff. So stay tuned for more. Thanks.